I thank the noble Lord McConnell, for calling this debate and for his long-term commitment to these issues. I also want to congratulate the noble lady Baroness Penn on her maiden speech, and I look forward to seeing the amazing things that she's going to do during her time in this House, and also the collegiate way in which she's going to undertake her work. For the purpose of this debate, I'm going to restrict my remarks to the way in which nations develop and how we have observed safer and fairer nations are actually built. I hope that this might provide some interesting thinking to feed into the Prime Minister's welcome review. My Lords, how a person, a community or a nation develops along the pathway from poverty to prosperity has long been a concern of mine. From my time spent living in the walled city in Hong Kong to my current role at the Legatum Institute, I refer to the Members' Register of Interests, the question of how a nation builds a safer, fairer and more prosperous society has challenged me greatly. At the Legatum Institute, we have been undertaking a piece of work entitled How Nations Succeed. We have analysed which nations, over a 60-year arc, from a starting point of fragility, have built fairer and safer societies, such as Colombia, and which, with exactly the same starting point, have struggled to do the same, such as Nicaragua. From this work, there are a number of lessons that we have observed, of which, don't worry, I'm only going to reference 3. The number one need for any country, as we've heard this afternoon in the debate, is quite self-evidently to deliver security, peace and stability for its people. Hence the safer world element of this debate. But there is also a need to strengthen the social contract between a government and its citizens. What can they really expect of one another? And then there is the need to create a positive environment for investment and the need to improve conditions for enterprise and flexible labour markets, all of which ultimately lead to a fairer society. Noble Lords will be grateful to know that I'm not going to unpack these one by one, but what is interesting to note here is that there is not a clear connection between the development of a nation and the distribution and focus of aid to that nation. To put it simply, what we have observed is that nations that receive aid but do not take responsibility for their own development do not thrive on a national scale, even if some of their people do benefit in the short term. But nations that take responsibility for their own destiny drastically outperform the development of those reliant on foreign assistance, regardless of their actual starting point. Against this background, let us first look at the issue of security and the creation of a secure foundation for a nation. No nation will be able to make the transition into a safer and fairer world without first delivering safety and security for its people. Stable governance, free from violent conflict and upheaval, is an essential requirement for development, as we have seen over the years in, say, Botswana. Countries need safety and security, effective governance, and a stable political environment to thrive. It is therefore no coincidence that poverty is concentrated in high-risk settings. 87% of people who are currently living in extreme poverty are in countries where security in all its forms, either political, social or environmental, is fragile. Globally, we are seeing the first welcome signs of increased safety and security around the world, following a trend of declining safety and security, and this is crucial for the establishing of greater fairness. The relationship between wealth generation, again, as we've heard, and security is essential. A nation with a basic level of safety and security is much more likely to create the conditions necessary for producing wealth or fairness for its citizens. As nations transition from violence to stability, the next important step is to strengthen the social contract between the government and its citizens. Our research shows that the strength and health of institutions has a stronger relationship with social well-being than aid in the long term. And this points to where the greatest development leverage is likely to be in the future. Improving the quality of institutions can stimulate increased economic well-being and thereby increased fairness. In the long term, therefore, the quality of institutions has a substantial impact on social well-being, and the integrity and accountability of government is strongly related to the sort of fairness outcomes we long to see in the developing nations in people's health, education, and living conditions. This is because with stable governments and institutional trust comes the ability to foster a positive investment environment. In our research, we have observed that the opening up of the world's economies has led to an extraordinary reduction in the number of people in poverty. Absolute poverty rates have fallen. The proportion of families living on less than $1.90 a day has more than halved since 2000, and this proportion continues to fall. We must not therefore forget that the greatest anti-poverty achievement in the history of mankind has actually happened in our lifetime. Mainstream economists on the left, the right, and in the centre agree on the central role that free trade, property rights, the rule of law, and entrepreneurship have all played in creating a fairer world. In our focus on aid, we must not hinder or constrain this meta-narrative that is changing the world faster than any aid programme could. The final lesson we learnt when analysing how nations succeed is that countries that have developed over the last 60 years, such as Indonesia, have developed across multiple fronts concurrently, strengthening their institutions, growing their economies, and improving the well-being of their people. This has seen a decrease in mortality rates across all age groups and a growing life expectancy. Our research shows that across both living conditions and education, 85% of countries across the world saw an improvement over the last 10 years. Education systems are affording more people the opportunity to learn, with higher enrolment rates at each learning stage and women spending more time in school on average, such as in a country like Mauritius. These improvements to living conditions, health, and education foster communities and nations that are resilient enough to weather the challenges that an unpredictable world can provide. There is significant food for thought in this debate as we consider the way forward and the role Britain should play in international development. If we are really focused on supporting the development of nations, do we need a conversation around how nations really succeed and develop? In order to build a compassionate world, we should certainly be focused on providing assistance at times of crisis, famine, and flood. Stability is absolutely the basis on which all prosperity is predicated. But if we really want to learn from effective models and use our defence, diplomacy and development to support emerging nations, should we work with the instincts of a nation where they are committed to development? Across all fronts, the nations that have forged the pathway from poverty to prosperity have worked to attract the people, ideas and capital they need to succeed.